So I wanted to do a shorter video talking about complex trauma because I did a live stream recently and it's over 2 hours. And not everybody is going to listen to that. That's for people who like long form videos, who want to see me kind of go through the information that I was finding. I also read something from Reddit. So it's really helpful, right? I did some explaining. I talked about my own experiences to some extent. But this is kind of like more of a synopsis, a shorter version, right? So what is complex trauma? So let's quickly go to the website that I used when I did the live stream. And let me just quickly share my screen because I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can because y'all know I can talk. Um, okay, so this is the website that I used before, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. That's the website. So it says complex trauma describes both children's exposure to multiple traumatic experiences, often of an invasive interpersonal nature, and the wide ranging long term effects of this exposure. These events are severe and pervasive, such as abuse or profound neglect. They usually occur early in life and can disrupt many aspects of the child's development and the formation of a sense of self. Since these events often occur with a caregiver, they interfere with a child's ability to form a secure attachment. Many aspects of a child's healthy physical and mental development rely on this primary source of safety and stability. And then we can quickly go over the effects. So before I go there, I just want to say briefly like some things that stand out. So this is different than just post traumatic stress disorder, which is usually linked to like one event or one experience in life. Complex trauma is basically saying that there's been a series of traumatic experiences. That's why it's complex post traumatic stress disorder. That's really what complex trauma is. And it says it's invasive, interpersonal, it's multiple traumatic events, it's severe and pervasive, it involves abuse or profound neglect. So, like I said in the live stream, it doesn't have to always be intentional abuse by caretakers or whoever is involved in the child's life that contributed to them having these type of traumatic experiences. It can also be neglect, and that may not always be intentional either. Sometimes the parents or the caretakers or those who took care of you, they had their own mental health illnesses. They had physical ailments. Maybe you were even in a caretaker role as a child, having to take care of them, having to raise cousins, siblings, other people in your life. You were parentified. If you were a sickly child like I was, that can be very traumatic. If you lost your mother like I did from an early age, that could be traumatic. Not having your father in your life like I did, right? So there's multiple, what they call them, like an ACE score, adverse child experiences. The more adverse child experiences you have, the higher ACE score, the more likely you are to have trauma and have mental health illness and all these different types of things that come from that, right? Because it's hard enough for a child to just be a child in general and they're learning to develop and learning to come into themselves. You got to go to school, you're dealing with that. But then to have traumatic experiences, that adds on to it. And if you have multiple simultaneously, well, this is where complex trauma comes in. And this is also like long term. So it's not like you have one experience and then it goes away, not to discount that, but it's something that's pervasive that keeps happening and there's not really much solution. The child cannot really find a way to get out of it. There's not really much that is really being done to stop what's occurring, and this causes a lot of trauma. So it's very common that people who grow up that way end up having a lot of issues and concerns because been exposed to so many different forms of trauma throughout their childhood. And your childhood is a major season of life where you're having so much development that's occurring. Your brain is trying to develop, right? There's so many things occurring at one time. So your brain is very malleable. Like I said in the live stream, your brain is always able to rewire. But when you're at that small age, or even as a teenager, but especially when it starts from your young age and continues on into your teenage years, that does something to your brain, right? So it's very important that we learn about these things because a lot of the other things that I have discussed on this channel about relationships and just life in general, if you have had complex trauma and it's something you struggle with, it makes sense to learn about this and understand it so you can better understand yourself and do the internal work, seek therapy, seek support groups, seek different communities of people who struggle with that as well so that you can grow and heal and go through the recovery process. So let's talk about like the effects. So I'm not going to go too much into it because you can watch the live stream if you want more of an extensive I didn't read the whole thing in a live stream, but I did kind of go through it a little bit more. So, attachment and relationships, physical health, body and brain, emotional responses, disassociation, behavior, cognitive thinking and learning, self concept and future orientation, long term health effects, and economic impact. So, these are some of the ways that complex trauma can affect a person and even society as a whole on a sociological level when it talks about the economic impact. And it's not just economic, like there's social consequences as well. There's other things as well too, but I found it interesting when it talked about the economic impact. People don't understand how it costs a lot of money when children have a lot of concerns like this, and then there's a lot of services that's needed, right? And then the juvenile justice system, like there's a lot that goes into that, and that affects society as a whole on an economic level as well. So it's beyond just on a micro level, it's also on a macro level. So that's kind of what complex trauma is. Let me see if I can find another site that I didn't use yesterday. And let's see. Okay, so they have something here from the Cleveland Clinic. .org. It says complex. It has CPTSD, which is complex PTSD. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, can result from experiencing chronic trauma such as prolonged child abuse or domestic violence. It's closely related to PTSD and borderline personality disorder. CPTSD is manageable with psychotherapy, talk therapy, and medication. What is CPTSD? Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, is a mental health condition that can develop if you experience chronic or long-term trauma. It involves stress responses such as anxiety, having flashbacks or nightmares, avoiding situations, places, and other things related to the traumatic event, heightened emotional responses such as impulsivity or aggressiveness, persistent difficulties in sustaining relationships. Examples of chronic trauma include long-term child physical or sexual abuse, long-term domestic violence, being a victim of human or sex trafficking, war, frequent community violence. While CPTSD is often associated with chronic trauma in children, adults who experience chronic trauma can also develop the condition. It says CPTSD as a diagnosis. Experts across the field of psychology disagree on if CPTSD is a distinct condition and diagnosis. I think I had mentioned that in the live stream that I'm not even sure if it's in the DSM. But let's continue to see here. It says, for example, 2 organizations that publish professional reference books have different opinions about CPTSD. In 2019, the World Health Organization, WHO, listed CPTSD in its 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases, ICD-11. But the American Psychiatric Association, APA, which publishes a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, the DMS. Okay, I guess they say DMS. I always heard of it as DSM. Doesn't recognize CPTSD as a distinct condition. Okay, here it goes. The DSM-5 does list a subtype of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, called dissociative PTSD that seem to encompass CPTSD symptoms. Some experts believe that CPTSD, PTSD, and borderline personality disorder may exist on a spectrum of trauma-related mental health conditions that vary in the severity of their symptoms. So, we don't have to go too much into that. We can talk about that another time because I have noticed that there are some similarities between complex post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder, but I'm not going to get into that in this video, not live stream, in this video, because that's not what this video is about. I want to try to keep this not too long. So I want to see if I can find something. Let me see. Okay, so there might not actually be any actual this is the Reddit thread that I was reading yesterday on the live stream. So we can just read maybe 3 or 4 of them. And then actually before we do that, I want to talk about why I believe that complex trauma can contribute to certain people being a late bloomer. Well, if you spend a lot of your childhood experiencing trauma in that type of context where you've experienced a lot of, especially if you experience a lot of things simultaneously, you're spending a lot of your childhood focusing on that. That doesn't mean you're still not enjoying your childhood. You're not playing with other kids. You're not having certain experiences. Of course, I did that as a kid. I went to the park. I had, a small group of friends. Like I did have good experiences. But a lot of my time and energy was also spent in trying to overcome and deal with the stuff that I was dealing with, trying to understand why these things were happening to me. And then going to school and also being mistreated. It just felt like everywhere I turned, there was always something going on. And then there was some kind of parentification in there to some extent, not intentional, but because of the nature of the household that I grew up in. So it was just a lot. And I feel like a lot of my childhood, I feel like was kind of like stolen from me, not intentionally, but because of the circumstances. Because, like I said, I had to focus on so much stuff. Like, I felt like by the time I was like 16 years old, I had already lived like a bunch of lives. Like, I felt like I always, so you know how like in Drake's song, one of his songs, he's like, I'm too young to be feeling this old. That's kind of how I felt my whole life. Like even as a child, I would feel older than I was. Even though I looked younger, I always looked young. People thought I was always younger than what I was because I was so tiny and I also had like such a young face. But internally, I always felt older because I had been through so much. I had been through more stuff. Like I would talk to adults and they would be like, I've never even been through the stuff you've been through. And I wasn't even like a teenager yet. So I had been through like so much stuff and I felt like it forced me to grow up really fast in some areas in order to survive, in order for me to also be there for my family in certain ways too, even as a child, even as a teenager. But I feel like it also caused some level of arrested development other areas because for one, like I mentioned in the live stream yesterday, when you go through trauma, a lot of times it keeps you stuck in certain ways at a certain age because that's the age you had those traumatic experiences. But it also sometimes can keep you kind of have a it can also kind of keep you stunted because you didn't have time or the ability to develop those other areas of yourself. So you may like really strive in like certain things like, being able to be empathetic, being able to, give great advice, I would even have adults coming to me sometimes for advice or to vent, whatever, because I had already been through so much stuff. And even now, even as an adult, sometimes I talk to older people and they're like, wow, like, I like talking to you, whatever. Like I learned so much from you because even though obviously they have more life experience than me, but because I have been through so much, I just kind of sometimes see things a certain way because I'm an old soul. So in a way that's great, but in a way I feel like sometimes like it makes you kind of childlike in some ways because like I said, you didn't get to develop some other aspects of yourself. So you might be a little stunted in some areas. And then when I meet other people who didn't go through that, or maybe they did go through trauma, but maybe they were raised differently. So they were kind of forced to grow up in other ways, right? Then they may strive in like, maybe like in the workplace or, being out here in the streets and how to interact with people. They don't deal with social awkwardness, say like, but then when it comes to maybe like empathy and other things that I may be stronger in, they don't have that ability because they were stunted in that area, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's rare to run into somebody who has complex trauma and they don't have a stunted area of their life. It's just that people sometimes are raised different. Like with guys, for example, sometimes, not always, but at least the guys that I've been with and I've dated, I feel like they were really great with like being able to like kind of be able to connect with people, being able to observe people, being able to not have like social awkwardness and all this fear, and they were comfortable with themselves and they kind of were confident in themselves. Of course, every guy has insecurities, but you know what I mean. Meanwhile, I was struggling with that, but then maybe they struggle with more like emotional stuff. And it doesn't mean that I don't struggle with emotional stuff. It's just that like I've kind of learned how to like have certain conversations, how to have deep conversations, how to kind of listen to other people, try to see myself like in their shoes when they're going through pain and trauma or loss. Like so many women have come to me when they've lost a parent or they've lost a relationship with it because I just had been through so much stuff already, right? And then as I got older, I started having my own additional experiences on top of what I had already been through. So I feel like now I've been through so much stuff. I feel like sometimes I'm like 50 years old because I've been through so much, right? And since I live my life, like people say, oh, you're like an old woman. You act like an old woman, the way you dress, the way you act. But people don't understand that I've been through so much. And maybe that's why I am the way that I am, because it's like I don't feel the need to go to the club or be running around doing things that some people are still doing my age because I've already been there, done that. I've already been through so much. I just want to relax. I just want to find a way to calm my nervous system and regulate my nervous system because it's been dysregulated my entire life. And I just want to find a way to be at peace. I want to find a way to work through the anger and the pain and the sadness and the regret and the lost time and all the different things you feel when you have complex trauma, right? And then if you, like I said, you also are stunted. Now you're a late bloomer. So you're trying to catch up. Like you're trying to catch up financially, you're trying to catch up socially, you're trying to catch up emotionally. Like everybody may not struggle in all areas. Like I said, everybody's situation is different. For me, I kind of feel like I felt behind in so many areas. But even with like those men, like I said, that I dated or even just was cool with and just friends, we never really dated or anything, I would notice that there were other areas that they were trying to catch up on too. So it's not like, oh, it's because you're dumb and you just don't know. No, it's because you had to spend so much energy trying to survive in other areas that now you're trying to catch up in this area, and you feel behind because you see other people and they're striving in these areas, and you're looking at yourself like, well, what's wrong with me, right? But it's not really your fault because you're doing the best that you can. And sometimes, like I said in another video, um and I probably said it before in other videos too, it's like some of the things I do have to take accountability for, some of the things that I did choose to do, and it really did set me back, and it really did cause me even more trauma, right? And that could have been avoided. That was my choice, right? But I was acting out in ways trying to, I guess, deal with the trauma that I had, right? So I have to take accountability for that. But then that initial experience as a child, that's not something that I had any control over. Like, you have to sometimes also give yourself grace. And that's something that I'm learning. Even in the experiences where you made poor decisions that cost you so much trauma, on top of that, it cost you lost time. You still sometimes have to, yes, take accountability, but give yourself grace because you were doing what you knew is best. And sometimes I feel like I still am hard on myself because I'm like, oh, I knew better. Like I was a wise younger person. Like I would see certain signs, I would feel certain things, and I knew sometimes things was off, but I would still stay. I would still, go into situations, and I feel like I beat myself up for that because I feel like, oh, well, you wasn't really fully naive. You kind of knew that something wasn't right, or you kind of felt something. But even then, just because you know something or you feel something doesn't mean you're gonna go and make the best decision. Like I always say, to know is just the beginning. To know better is to do better. No, not necessarily. Not everybody. If that was the case, everybody would be doing better. You know how many people know that they should be working out, but they're not doing it? You know how many people know they should be eating healthier, but they're not doing it? You know how many people know that they should be saving their money, but they're not doing it? So just because you know it doesn't mean it's automatically going to translate into consistent action. Or you may start but not be consistent. So it's a lot that goes into that. So it's really like it's even hard for people without complex trauma to be consistent and to do what they need to do to be successful as an adult in this world, especially with the economy and everything that's going on. So imagine how it's going to be for somebody with complex trauma. So you have to kind of give yourself grace. So I feel like this is also contributes to why you can be a late bloomer and be so behind, because you're literally trying to like find a way to regulate your nervous system. You're literally trying to come out of survival mode. Like, so you have to understand that it's going to take you longer in most cases to do things because you're trying to do multiple things simultaneously, and you're trying to learn something. Some things you literally have to parent yourself in because you weren't taught those things, or you were, but it wasn't taught in a toxic way. Not always intentionally, like I said, but it's like either way, you have to now reparent yourself. So it's a lot that goes into that. Um, and then the grief, right? Some people go through the grieving process of like feeling behind, feeling like they've lost time, feeling like they've wasted time, feeling like they wish they would have did this and did that because of where they were when they were younger. So it's a lot that goes into that. So that's something that I'm trying to learn to give myself grace. It's hard because I'm very hard on myself. I'm like a perfectionist, but and sometimes it's crazy because it's like I'm also an INFJ, so we're very dichotomous. And you could be a perfectionist in one sense, but then be so completely chaotic in another sense. It's like, how are you like perfectionist, but then you struggle with being able to keep order? I just find that kind of very interesting. um, that's why I like creativity, because creativity doesn't really have much order to it. It's like you can just kind of freely express yourself. But at the same time, it's like you still need order, especially when you have complex trauma, because you are so used to dysregulation and lack of order. And that's why you're so like dysregulated. So you have to learn to find a way to put some order and structure in your life so that you're not so disorganized, so that your room is not a mess, so that your finances are not a mess, so that your health is not a mess, so that your relationships are not a mess. You have to sometimes create some order. And that's hard for us because we're so used to doing things last minute, or doing things under pressure, doing things in a chaotic environment. So when things are not like that, it's like, oh, I'm bored, or not bored, because I really ever feel bored, but it's like, oh, I'm just going to relax right now, or I don't feel like doing it. it's almost like somebody has to light a fire under you in order for you to get up and get stuff done, and that's not healthy. You know what I mean? Like there's a time to be very like go 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 go, but you don't want to be in that type of state all the time. And I think when you're so used to that, you kind of become so um you become so ingrained in I have to somebody has to put a bat in my back in order for me to get stuff done. And that's not always healthy. Anyways, I can go on and on about that, but I just kind of wanted to add a framework. Also, like maladaptive behavior. So you were like the caretaker child, you was a scapegoat child, you was a golden child. You had to play all you was the jokester. Like you had to create all these different roles, and many times you're not even realizing you're doing it as a child, but you're just coming into these different roles in order to fit the family dynamics of this regulation. And now you also have to unlearn a lot of these maladaptive behaviors as well, so that's also why sometimes it takes you longer to get stuff done. um yeah, and then you feel like you don't fit in. You have a hard time like with adulting and getting stuff done. And then as a woman, because I try to focus on things for women because I'm a woman, it's like you're still dealing with coming into womanhood, your body, your sexuality, um, having children, marriage, financial freedom, all these different things that are like precious, right? So imagine having to go through all of that, being a woman and being in a society where women are still like things have improved in some ways, but women are still, collectively dealing with a lot of things. And if you're a black woman, it's even more so, right? And then you have to also deal with complex trauma. Of course, you may struggle with certain areas and feeling behind. It's not the case for everybody with complex trauma, but it's common. So that's why I say, it's a lot you're dealing with. So I feel like we have to give ourselves grace, not make excuses and say, oh, well, I had trauma. So, it is what it is. If I curse people out, it is what it is. No, like you need to also like hold yourself accountable. Say, I did some things in my life that was, really messed up. I shouldn't have did that. I shouldn't have said that. But that was a firm place of trauma, and now I know that's wrong. I need to stop doing that. I need to do the internal work and find the help and support I need to try to work on myself. And it's very difficult. Sometimes you have to change your environment too. That's what I feel like I also need to do, change my environment. But we have to start where we are and do what we can, even if it's just little things here and there. And that's how I was able to make some changes in my life, especially when it came to like, relationships with guys, because it's almost like when I think back about where I was when I was like 19, 20, it's like really, really different now. So I'm still not where I would like to be, but my goodness, thank goodness I'm not still struggling with certain things that I was before, or maybe I am, but to a far lesser extent. So that's why I say the little things you do over time, it may feel like sometimes I look back and I have to remind myself how far I've come, because sometimes I feel like I haven't really made much progress. Sometimes I feel like I'm even getting worse. And people are like, are you sure you're getting worse? Because I remember when you were back then and you look like you're much better now. So you might feel that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting worse. So when you're going through like healing is always messy. Growth is always messy. It's rarely ever going to be a smooth sailing. For some people it is, most people it's not. So you just kind of have to understand that. So this is why sometimes you'll be a late bloomer. So let's quickly read like two or three of these and then I'm going to end the video. So the person, let's just read the initial post. It says, I am currently 33 years old and have achieved a lot of milestones later than everyone else. I have also realized through therapy that I have developmental trauma, which is similar to CPTSD, but it formed solely during childhood as a result of significant attachment injuries and adverse experiences. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I'm slowly starting to realize that maybe the reason why a lot of my peers in my age group seem to have stable adult lives is because they did not go through as much trauma as I did. Even some people I know who have rough relationships with their parents and insecure attachment styles have more of a well-adjusted adult life than I do, as maybe they haven't gone through the same level of emotional abuse or stupid family decisions that I have. I have also been reading a lot of posts on here from people that have reached their milestones late thanks to trauma. And it's not just a CPTSD thing, it's also a thing with ADHD, autism, OCD, and any other mental health conditions, maybe because of the underlying trauma. I saw a post on Threads recently that said that late bloomers are often a result of dysfunctional families that didn't know how to support them in meeting milestones on time, and this definitely applies to me. A huge part of the family dynamics, excuse me, a huge part of the family dysfunction that I faced was me not being allowed to make a lot of my own decisions and being put down and criticized a lot. So somebody said, I still definitely feel like I'm in my teens despite being 40. Somebody said, I finally starting to feel that I'm in my mid 20s and I'm almost 44. This absolutely checks. After years of intense healing, trauma healing, that is. Somebody says, I'm still blooming at almost 44 and it's definitely related in my opinion. We pretty much have to reparent ourselves and learn or relearn all the things we didn't learn in a negative way. We didn't or learned in a negative way as children. It's a struggle, but there's always more time as long as we're still breathing. You got this. Let's see. Let me maybe like 3 or 4 more. We'll just end the video. And this one really stood out to me when I read it yesterday. It says being alive is an achievement if you have CPTSD. I thought that was profound too, because the fact that you have to survive all of that, especially if you had like multiple traumatic experiences as a child, like, like I said yesterday in the live stream, not everybody made it through. So that is an accomplishment that you're still alive and able to, and that you're seeking ways to try to improve yourself. Somebody says it's funny. Long before I got diagnosed with CPTSD, I would always half joke that I'm 10 years younger behind my peers, and that seems to have kept up in terms of life stages. It gives me some hope about what could come, even though I'm a bit older. Somebody said I'm opposite. I was an adult by 8 years old, and they said I hit milestones too early. So by the time I hit 37, physically, I was 37, but mentally and emotionally, I was that of an 80-year-old. I never had a childhood. I basically am an instant adult. Well, even that can still be considered a late bloomer, because I'm sure that even if you feel, like I said, I feel older too. But even though you feel older, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not still a late bloomer, because yeah, you may have hit certain milestones early, and that's great. I didn't hit certain milestones early. But at the same time, I'm sure that there's still a lot of things that this person didn't get to experience in their childhood, and they're probably going to have to try to experience it later in life. Well, that's still kind of a late bloomer, because the things that people got to experience in their childhood, you didn't get to experience that because you didn't have a childhood. So now you're 37, trying to do this, trying to do that, and people looking at you like, I did that when I was 16. But for you, it's like, well, this is my first time because I didn't get a childhood. So to me, I feel like I'm not discounting what they're saying, because that is different. If you hit milestones early, you may not be a late bloomer in that sense, but you may still be a late bloomer in the sense of emotionally or socially, or being able to just experience certain things because you didn't get a chance to, because you didn't have a childhood, so yeah. But anyways, I'm gonna probably stop here. Let me see what this one says. It says, yep, I feel you. I didn't start playing soccer until my 20s, didn't have a girlfriend until my 20s, and so on. And even now, my friend group is all over the place. Some of my friends are in their late 20s, some are in their 30s, and some are in their 40s. It's like I'm a human time machine, constantly bouncing around trying to figure out my actual age. Bingo. you know, it's true. Sometimes I feel kind of connected to people who are younger, and sometimes I feel connected to people who are my age, and then I feel connected to people who are like a little older and people who are like way older. It's really, really weird, because I feel like I've lived so many different lives, and then there's still some things I'm trying to catch up on, so I can relate to kind of so many different types of people. Some people say, oh, I can't relate to some of these younger people. I'm like, in some ways I can. Like, some of the things that they do, I'm like, okay, I don't get that, because we grew up differently as millennials. But I still sometimes can relate. Sometimes I even like some of the music that they like, or some of the social media trends that they do, because like I said, I still feel like I'm trying to, like, it's hard because you want to be mature, you are older, you want to be trying to like be an example, but you also feel like you've lost out on some of the things you wanted to do when you were younger. So you're trying to still hold on to some of that like youth, but you don't want to do it in a way that's unhealthy. And in the same way how you feel like you feel older than what you are, and it's okay to be wise and to kind of be like an old soul, but you also don't want to miss out on enjoying your current years as well, because before you know it, you turn around, you're 50 and you're like, I didn't even get to really enjoy my 30s and 40s. So I feel like it's like you're like, kind of like walking this tightrope of trying to like balance all of that out, because you never really feel your real age. So I definitely relate to that. So So I'm going to stop here, and I just wanted to kind of make a shorter video for those who kind of want to hear about complex trauma and what complex trauma really is. And of course, you can do your own research, but I kind of wanted to tie it in with being a late bloomer and all of that. So this is like a shorter video. It's a 30-minute video. I wanted it to be a little less, but that's okay. It's still better than 2 hours and 30 minutes for those who don't want to listen to all of that. So take care, y'all, and I'll come back again with another video. And if you notice, if you look at the page channel, I've kind of changed the banner. I'm trying to change things around on the channel a little bit because I feel like this is very important. I'm still gonna, sometimes I make a video about other things too, depending on how people respond to stuff. But I just kind of want things to kind of become a little more deep on the channel because I feel like it's so important for us to do internal work. I feel like that's something I'm actually very passionate about. So I wanted to kind of start sharing that on here. So take care, y'all, and I will talk to y'all again soon. Bye.